Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Berkshire Pension Fund Committee on the Monday, the 17th of March. My name is Councillor Bond, and I will be chairing this meeting. It's being held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting, it will continue to be available in the public domain. We're not expecting a fire alarm to sound. However, if it does, please may I ask that you leave in an orderly fashion and rendezvous across the road outside the library next to the fountain. Firstly, it would be useful if all voting members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they are undertaking. So as I said, I'm Simon Bond, I'm a councillor here in Maidenhead and I'm chairing the meeting.
I'm Jo Thistlewood, I'm Head of Pension Fund.
Good afternoon, Philip Boyton, Deputy Head of Pension Fund.
I'm Martin Griffiths, I'm the Pension Administration Manager for the Pension Fund.
Ian O'Donnell, I'm the Executive Director of Resources for Windsor Maidenhead.
Aoife Devitt, Independent Advisor to the Pension Fund.
Doug Sharp, Independent Advisor to the Pension Fund. Richard Tomlinson, Chief Investment Officer, LPPI.
Matthew Graham, Chief Business Development Officer, LPPI.
Alan Cross, Chair of the Berkshire Pension Board. Councillor Zafar Sapti from Slough Borough Council, Member RBWM.
Stephen Newton, Member of the Advisory Panel from Working Borough Council.
Councillor Suzanne Cross, voting member of the panel and Vice Chair of the committee.
Councillor Mark Howard, substitute member of the panel.
Mikey Lloyd, Democratic Service Officer and Clerk to the committee.
And Councillor Majid online.
Yeah, Councillor Majid, Councillor Ascot, voting member of the panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I have invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. I will also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If an individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. I would also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a committee, I would ask you please to limit the repetition of points or questions which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We will now start on the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we have a single apology tonight from Councillor Wilson, who is being substituted by Councillor Howard.
Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. My wife is an active member of the scheme. Thank you.
On to agenda item 3. Are we happy to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you. So agenda item 4 is statutory policies to consider and approve the fund's business plan and budget for 2025 to 2026. Is that you, Jo?
That's me, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. This report presents the budget and the business plan for the pension fund for the financial year 25-26. It's been discussed with members of staff within the pension fund team who have contributed to some amendments to the proposed mission and value statements that are included in there. And they've also contributed to the ideas for the work plan for the forthcoming year. The business plan itself is in a very similar format to that which has been presented previously to this committee for adoption. It has historically been what appears to be the business plan of the head of pension fund and hasn't necessarily been shared in terms of the preparation and contents with members of staff within the pension fund team or with members of the committee panel and board for their input. So going forward, my intention is to hold some workshops in the third quarter of the financial year, fourth quarter of the calendar year, to review and agree the objectives and business plan activities going forward for the future years. So there are a couple of additions that have been made to the mission statement, which is included on page 25 of your meeting pack. We've included an additional bullet within our mission statement to include engagement with employers and ensuring that they are aware of their responsibilities and we keep them updated with changes to regulations that may impact them. And also the final two bullets on that page to include the committee's responsibilities for ensuring suitable investments are maintained to achieve 100% funding and to maintain a stability of employer contribution rates that are agreed with each of the employers. So the major changes there. There's a budget presented in the pack on page 29, which includes a forecast of all of the high-level budget expenditure for the pension fund for the financial year. The key things to note are that primarily the items under dealings with members in terms of contributions and benefits payable are slightly less under our control than potentially we would most budget items, because they are very much dependent on member activity and employer activities in terms of membership and contributions paid, etc. So the real key controllable items on that page are the staff costs and the administration costs. The staffing budget is what is included in the RBWM budget for the pension fund, but it is 100% recharged to the pension fund. So any changes or overspends, underspends in that area do not impact on the council's bottom line as administering authority, but are managed within the pension fund. The budget is predicated for staffing on all staff being in post for a full year at full-time hours and at the top of their appropriate salary scale. To be very clear, not all staff are in post, not all staff are full-time, and not all staff are at the top of their grade. But that is the budget, and we are operating within that cash footprint within the way that we work. The objectives, the business objectives on page 30 onwards are matching to the stated business aims included earlier in the business plan, some of which are business as usual items in terms of administration and paying benefits and doing statutory reporting. Some of them are specific project work, so the McLeod project, which members will be aware of, the dashboards project, compliance with the pension regulators code of practice, and the outcomes of any consultations. And some of them are developmental, including a review of our staffing capacity and also development of knowledge and understanding for committee, board, panel and officer members. This was discussed by the pension board this morning, and the pension board have no objections or further comments on the business plan or any amendments that they wish to make. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments that members may have through the chair. Otherwise, I'd move the recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. It's good to see basics like the budget. Are there any comments or questions from members? Oh. Alan Cross.
Just briefly to comment in addition to Joan, probably the largest discussion we had this morning at the board was just to reflect on the staffing situation, reflecting that probably as a whole we've got less experienced staff than we would ideally like to have. That's just reflected the challenges of recruitment recently.
I guess you've all got the recommendations in front of you. There are 5 parts to it, including at the end, it agrees to hold a workshop in the 3rd quarter of the year in preparation for the creation of the business plan for next year. Are those acceptable? Oh, didn't see you. Yeah, far away.
Yes. Thank you. Can I just ask about just on the pension fund budget on the table, which is on page 29 in the pack? In terms of the anticipated the profits and losses on disposal of investments and changes in the market values, I mean, I presume what broadly are the assumptions which give us a profit, as it were, which is the majority of the net increase in the net assets?
Thank you, Councillor Toosey. That's a very good question. It's kind of a little bit of a finger in the air. It is based on the investments that we have under management at the date that the forecast was prepared. So I think this was probably December's estimated assets. And what we've tried to use as the assumption of change in market value to an extent is the actuarial benchmark return, the required minimum to maintain a stable funding level. So it's about 6-point-something% as a best guess. Obviously, it's totally without our control. We have no control over whether investment markets go up or down. So it's a combination of realised gains through sales of assets and market changes, market value changes.
We're assuming we achieve the benchmarks. Okay, fine. Okay.
Are the recommendations acceptable? Thank you. On to agenda item 5, risk management, to receive the updated risk register. Is that you again?
It is indeed. Welcome to the Joe Show. Again, another thorough review of the risk register report, which is presented in its entirety as Appendix A to this report. Following attendance at conferences and known changes and activities in the LGPS world and in the fund, I've reviewed the risk register. I've presented 5 new risks, which are detailed in paragraphs 2.3, increased the risk score for 3 other risks, and have provided all of the detailed information in the reporting pack. I'm happy to go into as much detail or as little detail as the committee wishes. I could work on the assumption that you've read the report, and I see a couple of nods around the table. So I'm going to work on the assumption that committee members have read the report and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that members may have at this time.
Councillor Tizzy.
Sorry. Yes, just, I mean, I'm just interested that in terms of the new risks, the 2 around inability to recruit or retain staff, both staff and the pension board members. Were these risks captured in some other way beforehand? I can't remember. Because I mean, I'm almost surprised that we've got, here's a new risk, oh, and it's right at the top. I'm sure, I remember it there somehow, but I can't remember exactly where.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Tizzy. If I start with the board membership risk, previously there is still a risk in there around knowledge and understanding of board, panel and committee members, and included within that mitigations for that was development of a succession plan. At the board meeting, at their December meeting, we initially took we looked at the terms of reference for the board, which is subsequently on this agenda, but we also looked at the terms of office for those board members, and we identified a timetable effectively for when board members' terms of office would come to an end, so that we can start planning a recruitment and retention or recruitment plan effectively for that succession. The board has historically struggled, along with many other LGPS funds, to recruit scheme member representatives, to the extent that we ran for almost 2 years with a vacancy on the pension board for a scheme member rep. So what we're trying to do is develop a succession plan, a recruitment programme, a defined role profile and suitable methods for advertising those vacancies, to hopefully mitigate against having a long-standing vacancy. Just to be clear with the vacancy, we are still compliant with the requirements of the Public Service Pensions Act 2013, which requires the board to have a minimum of 2 scheme member reps and 2 employer reps. The terms of reference for the pension board has historically had 3 of each. So having a vacancy on one of those has not meant that we're not compliant with regulations or legislation. It's just meant we've not necessarily had the full capacity. So what we're trying to do is mitigate against that circumstance happening again in the future. In terms of the staff recruitment and retention, we have historically had risks, and we still have risks around staff capacity and staff knowledge and skills. So those are still there, but what we've identified over recent months, in the time that I've been here at least, we've run 4 recruitment campaigns for experienced pensions administration staff, and each of those 4 recruitment activities has resulted in the appointment of trainees, which, you know, we've identified it's filling gaps in the team, but it's not fulfilling the experience level that we need. So we've also identified that there are only 86 LGPS administering authorities in the country, 32 of which are in London boroughs, and they have higher pay grades, shall we say, and we are very much in commuter distance to London boroughs. So to be able to attract qualified members of staff, we are up against some very significant challenges, and it's the same challenges that are faced by council finance staff as well as LGPS. So what we're trying to do is build in some capacity around that to review our current job descriptions, to review our current salary scales, and to undertake a national benchmarking exercise to an extent against other LGPS funds, to identify that our job descriptions are fit for purpose, that they fit within the council's job evaluation process, that our salaries are competitive, and if any of those items aren't in line with other things, then we look to put a business case to see whether there is anything we could do in terms of market supplements or similar. So those 2 risks have previously been addressed in the risk register, but what I wanted to do is highlight them as separate additional risks beyond the ones that we previously had, if you see what I mean.
Alan Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the issue of recruitment to the board, the issues are a little bit different between employer and member reps. The 3 employer reps are have normally been filled by a senior finance officer from one of the unitaries, a senior HR officer from one of the unitaries, and in recent years, somebody from the academy sector being the sort of third largest. As Joe's indicated, in terms of the member rep, we've advertised the vacancies as they've arisen over the years in the member bulletin, and often drawn blanks. The vacancy we recently had, we were able to fill by reaching out to Unison in Reading and asking them to identify somebody, and that's brought forward a nomination. But clearly there are two of us who've been on the board as member reps for a number of years, and we won't go on forever. So there will come a time when we have to be replaced. Hopefully we can both give reasonable notice so that can be done at the proper time. Thanks.
Councillor Howard.
I was most surprised, slightly concerned about the lack of engagement from the members to put a representative onto the board, especially when I've been in previous meetings where the pension entitlement inside the public sector was seen as a major positive for being employed in that sector. Yet we don't seem to be getting that engagement to be involved and enthused in possibly one of the biggest benefits by being employed by the public sector. Having seen other pension boards working, I've experienced both different types, and I tend to find that it seems to be sometimes quite a closed shop, that people who know people who know people or friends of people somehow seem to be involved. And when we have a membership, if I remember, of many thousands, that seems to be a less than effective way of doing it. And maybe we need to explore some way of opening up that group or that membership of people so that we can bring new blood in. As was said by Mr. Cross, people will not go on forever. And by getting people involved early, we start getting new ideas, we start building enthusiasm, people start understanding what a bonus and what a benefit the pension scheme is to them in their employment. And potentially that word goes through the whole sector as something which can be factored into people's employment choices. So cutting to the quick is, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get new blood involved? And how are we going to bring, I hate to say this, the average age of this group down?
Thank you.
More to Suzanne's age than mine. Sorry, I'm just about to overheat.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. That's a very good question, and probably to an extent cuts exactly to the point of the matter. What we haven't necessarily bottomed out, and I think has been part of our issue, is how do we attract members of the pension fund onto the pension board to get involved, and how do we promote it as an exciting opportunity? Because it really is an exciting opportunity. Pensions is quite exciting sometimes. So we will be looking at development of a role profile. We will be looking at promoting the opportunities. With the greatest respect, those members who are retired and who are not in full-time work probably have a greater opportunity to get involved. But then attracting the younger people, this is a volunteer post. There are knowledge and skills expectations. There's quite a lot of responsibility on members of the pension board. So it's to try and develop a way of promoting that activity. It's a common problem across all of the LGPS. How do you get young, exciting members interested in pensions, which they're probably not going to be worrying about until they're in their 60s? So it's that is part of the problem, and that's why we're looking at this now, when we're not in a absolute drop dead situation of having to recruit it. Let's plan it and let's promote it, and let's work on other best practice across the sector. So I am talking with other LGPS funds. I'm looking at other LGPS funds websites, how they promote their board, so that we can use that same kind of attraction to get members onto this board as well.
Could I maybe suggest that we, when approaching the membership, we make it clear that although it's voluntary, obviously attending of meetings is, shall we say, not holiday, that there are training opportunities to expand your learning and knowledge. And it is not just turning up to a meeting and being there. There is a potential opportunity there, especially if you're in the finance area.
Thank you. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, you've answered some of the questions, so I won't go over those. But one point I thought might be of interest is secondments. I mean, again, I've worked in similar organisations where the talent pool has been quite narrow. And then to attract some of that talent into parts of the organisation, we've seconded people in and out to get different ways different organisations work. So I was wondering if that was something we could possibly do, to look at seconding people in that small pool. And like you're saying, Joe, you're talking to other organisations as well that, or, you know, we all got the same problems here. Whether that would be something we could potentially look at as an idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's something we'll definitely look at. I think that the difficulty, I mean, the ideal source for seconding people into the pension fund would be the council's finance team, but I do know that the council's finance team is having its own recruitment and retention issues, so we've probably lost that there. I think there is also the complexity of the work that you need to do is not necessarily, you can't pick it up and run with it without a certain grounding in knowledge, which is why we're very fortunate that we've got the trainees, and the trainees that we have recruited over the last 12 months are progressing incredibly well and picking up and getting great support from the administration team, more senior members. But again, training somebody to do something means that something takes twice as long because it's a trainee and you're losing the expertise of the trainer to an extent. So it's ideally we would be recruiting experienced people in at the start, but we have to balance salary costs, training, retention, recruitment, retention against that. So we're trying to put a kind of a holistic program together for the staffing side, and for the pension board side, there is a requirement that you are a member of the pension fund before you can be a member rep on the pension board to an extent. So it's not necessarily a case of attracting somebody in from the outside to an extent. It's got to be somebody who's in the fund before they can do it. The employer side is less difficult because there are routes that we can tap into. For example, the unitary authorities in Berkshire, I can speak to the chief finance officers and say, would you like to nominate somebody? Which is how we've achieved the membership that we've got. But for the member representatives themselves, they don't have a body as such. We could approach unions to see whether they could nominate it, but not all of our active membership are in a union. And there are a number of unions that operate within the local authority sector. So we're trying to explore every avenue that we can to try and attract the right people.
Thank you. I see no more hands raised. So are the recommendations acceptable? Thank you. Our next item is number 6 on good governance, where there are a number of parts to this.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the first item under good governance is to approve the amended terms of reference for the local pension board, which is starting on page 61 of the meeting pack. The pension board was constituted in 2015 as a requirement of the Public Service Pensions Act 2013. And the board for the Royal County of Berkshire Pension Fund has been operating since that date. The terms of reference that are currently in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead Constitution are, I believe, those that were set up at the beginning of the board. As experience has happened and as the years have progressed, those terms of reference are nationally, and the requirements for the boards have kind of developed and settled in now. In 2022, the Pension Board reviewed their terms of reference and agreed some fairly substantive amendments. But that was never taken any further than the Pension Board themselves. So it was never recommended to this committee and was never taken forward to be included in the Constitution. So in December 24, the board reviewed their terms of reference and agreed the terms of office and to support recruitment planning, as we've previously mentioned. And the revised terms of reference that the board have agreed is presented to you as an appendix to this report. The next steps, the board met again this morning to review the final terms of reference and to reiterate their support. And the board's outcome this morning was to recommend those terms of reference as presented to you for adoption. The next steps after you've adopted them, on the assumption you do adopt them, is that we will ask you to recommend the terms of reference to the Constitution Working Group, who will consider those terms of reference and recommend them onwards again to full council for inclusion in the council's constitution. Speaking to Democratic Services officers today, following a recommendation today from the Pension Fund Committee, the Constitutional Working Group meets at the beginning of April, and they will consider and approve or otherwise the terms of reference. If they are approved by the Constitutional Working Group, they will be presented to full council on the 23rd of April for adoption into the council's constitution. Don't propose to go into too much detail, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Alan Cross.
Thanks, Chair. As Joe has indicated, we had a go at this, or I had a go at this, and it was my second go at this as Chair in 2022. His predecessor, the late Tony Pettit, had a go shortly after he became Chair about a decade ago. And I'm sort of rather hopeful this time we actually get all the way and get this into the Constitution, given certainly the terms of reference in the Constitution probably still refer to an independent chair, which the borough and the board dispensed with after its first year of operation, other than the contingency arrangements we put in these terms, should the board not be able to find its chair within its membership. So I hope you will be willing to agree these today, and that the Constitution Working Group will work them into the Constitution, and the Council will in due course approve that. Thank you.
Thank you. No more hands raised, so are they approved, the recommendations? Thank you. On to external audit, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a verbal update, as unfortunately the external audit for RBWM as administering authority, and as a result the external audit for the pension fund has not been concluded at the backstop date of the 28th of February 2025. Sorry, this is for the external audit for the year ended March 24. There has been an objection received to the RBWM accounts, which the external auditors are working through, but have determined that they have, as at the 12th of March, they're still working through the objections and their response to those, and there is no indicative timeframe as yet for the RBWM audit to be concluded. And as a result of the pension fund accounts being subsumed within the RBWM accounts, the pension fund audit cannot be concluded at this stage. The draft audit findings report for the pension fund was published with the Audit and Governance Committee papers on the 11th of February, and those are available for public review on the Audit and Governance Committee papers. So unfortunately, the external audit for 23-24 has not been concluded for the pension fund. I will obviously keep you updated. I'm in contact with my counterparts in RBWM Finance to ensure that as I'm updated as that's progressed, but as soon as I have any update, I will make sure that is passed on to you.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question in respect of what you just said, if that's okay. In terms of the challenges that have been received, or the objections, however you want to term it, I just wondered whether they relate to the pension fund specifically, or to the wider accounts of the local authority.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. To the best of my knowledge, they are objections to the RBWM accounts rather than to the pension fund accounts that are subsumed within them. So it's not, I have been informed by the auditors and Ian is nodding that there are no issues with the pension fund accounts per se. It is the RBWM accounts that are causing the problems here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on that point, can you share how many objections there has been and what timescale there is to get these concluded? Thank you.
There have been 2 objections to the accounts. One of them is very close to being resolved. The other one ran to 37 pages. The auditors currently working on that. They've been unable to give us a timescale for when that will be resolved.
Thank you. And we do have the Audit and Governance Committee meeting in a fortnight's time. So I have views on this. So I think there'll be more discussion there. As this is just a verbal report, are we happy to accept it? Thank you. The internal audit report.
Thank you very much, Chair. This report, the covering report is on page 77 of your pack. This was a review of the Pensions Administration Service as part of the internal audit programme of RBWM as administering authority. This review provided reasonable assurance on the Pensions Administration Service, and there are 2 low priority findings which are addressed on page 85 and 86 of your pack. The administration team, apologies, is working through those. Those findings have been acknowledged and recognised by the fund, and we are working towards those. Because it is a reasonable assurance report, it will not be presented in any great detail at the Audit and Governance Committee, simply to note that the Audit Committee will be asked to note that the audit is completed and to note that it has been given a reasonable assurance. And the board looked at this morning and are happy with the management responses to the recommendations. And we will keep the board and yourselves updated as to ensure that the progress is made. So I'm happy to take any questions off of this.
Councillor Tizzy?
Less a question than just, I mean, looking at the final report, it's pretty good, I think. I think it's just almost worth noting that that's the case, that actually, I mean, yes, notwithstanding the 2 sort of priority 3 findings, which it looks like will be or should be implemented within a month, this does appear to be a good report.
Thank you. I see no one else. Just to say, good to see this published in our papers and in the public domain. I think the report is just there for us to read. There's no recommendation. So if that's acceptable, moving on to the contracts for the funds to independent advisors.
Yes, another verbal update very quickly. The pension fund has contracts with 2 external advisors, Ethan Devitt and Camador, represented by Douglas Sharp here. The existing contracts for those 2 advisor contracts were due to expire on the 31st of March 25. Due to the timing of the valuation of the pension fund, which is as at March 25, will continue throughout 25-26, and we'll start looking at our investment strategy as a result of the triennial valuation. It seemed inopportune to start looking for new advisors at this point, when we need people who are familiar with our fund and our investment strategy to support us through the valuation process. So in accord, I've spoken to our procurement colleagues in RBWM, and because of the value of the contract and the timing, they have agreed that it is practical for us to extend the existing contracts of our advisors for a further period of 18 months up to September 26, during which point we will have concluded the vast majority of our investment strategy work as a result of the valuation. It will give us time to assess the requirements arising from the Fit for the Future consultation around independent advice and advice being received from the investment pools. So we're able to formulate our requirements for advice contracts, and we can carry out a more detailed, accurate procurement, probably starting work this time next year, with a view to letting those contracts and awarding them when the existing extensions expire. So just to formally note as the committee that the contracts have been extended, and that procurement activity will resume as work settles down.
Councillor Howard.
Completely agree that you're in a situation where you have to renew. I think it is possibly something we need to look at for next time, that both contracts do not expire on the same date. Going back to what we were saying before about making sure that we had knowledgeable, experienced staff in place, so in all sorts of roles, the idea that these are expiring at a dead end together seems to be unwise and increases the risk. So maybe next time we have contracts which are staggered, with maybe a year or 2 years between them, so they run one after the other.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. No issues at all with what you're doing or the basis for it. I think we all value the experience and knowledge that the independent members do bring to this panel and the committee. And I just wondered whether, obviously you do need to go through a process of procurement, but is there the opportunity for them to continue, or does it have to be a change at this time, or when you come to the further extension?
To the best of my knowledge, I'll have it, I'm not a procurement expert, there is nothing to prevent, when we re-let the contract, the incumbent suppliers reapplying for that process, but it's partly a test the market, it's partly a value for money, it's partly redefining the specification. I'm not saying that we wouldn't want the existing suppliers to continue, but it may be that our requirements are different, and that the services that our incumbent suppliers offer may not fit our future requirements. So there is nothing to prevent a reappointment, but it would be on a refreshed terms and conditions and a service specification.
Alan Cross.
Thanks, Chair. Just on that point, when these were last up 3 years ago, I think Ethan continued, somebody else was replaced by Candor Global, so that's sort of what happened last time. In retrospect, having 3-year contracts that were going to run out a year before the evaluation was probably not that wise at the time. We probably should have picked that up at the time. In my mind, I like the idea of having them staggered. I'm trying to sort of weigh that against the recognition that we've got this 3-year triennial evaluation cycle, and that sort of presents other challenges. So I think that's a sort of issue that probably needs some reflection, I would say. But let's see where we go on this. Clearly, there wasn't much sensible choice other than to extend through the next year and a half, through what will be traditionally the busiest of the 3 years of a cycle of the fund when it comes to the next valuation, as we'll find out when we're here this time next year and have papers in front of us to agree what the actuary is saying around that.
Thank you. I see no more speakers. Are the recommendations acceptable? Thank you. So on to knowledge and understanding update.
Thank you very much. This is my last item for a while, so I apologise. So 2 elements to this. Is to note the knowledge and understanding development activities that committee, panel and board members have undertaken over the last 12 months, which is presented as Appendix A. And then also to introduce a request or a request for approval to undertake a third-party assessment of current levels of knowledge and understanding for committee, panel and board members to assist the development of the proposed training and governance policy, which is required under the Fit for the Future consultation, to assist in setting a benchmark for the baseline of levels of knowledge and understanding, both individually for each individual member of the committee, panel and board, but then also to consolidate that collectively into identifying where there are knowledge gaps and help formulate a training plan and training strategy for the committee and board. This will help support the risk that we've identified of knowledge and understanding levels of committee, board and panel members. It will help improve compliance with the pension regulator's general code of practice, where in September we reported that 2 areas where we were potentially non-compliant was around knowledge and understanding of committee members. And it will also help support, as I say, the development of a training plan and the reporting against the delivery of improved knowledge and understanding. The report that's presented to you contains 2 options, where I've spoken to 2 external advisors, so Hymans Robertson and Barnett Waddingham. Both offer a very similar service in terms of the knowledge assessment, where it's a multi-choice, quick half-hour-ish survey for all board, committee, panel members to undertake to assess their confidence in their levels of knowledge and understanding of various topics. For both, that would be individual members would complete that and would be chased, harassed and cajoled in any way, shape or form to make sure that everybody did complete it. And then following that, there are 2 options. The Hymans Robertson report and price that's included in the report includes the assessment of that, the consolidation of those results into an analysis and the recommendations of areas of learning and understanding, which also feeds into their national knowledge assessment, which compares levels of understanding for committee and boards across the country relative to each other, which may be slightly above and beyond what we need at the moment. The Barnett Waddingham option is they provide the questionnaire and then the results come into us and we do our own analysis and identify where the gaps are, both of which equally beneficial. It depends what level we want to do. So what I'm seeking here really is your approval for me to commission such a study, work out which one is the best through. And then if we do commission that, there will be a report to spending control panel to ensure that it is appropriately resourced. It will be funded from the pension fund's budget. And then once that is done, undertake your commitment as committee, board, panel members to do that survey. And then when the results come through, I will see your individual results, but your individual results will be between you and me. I won't share your individual results collectively, but I will consolidate a board level report, a committee level report, and we can identify where the collective lower levels of knowledge and understanding are so that we can build a collective development plan. So the recommendations are as they are on the paper, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Well, we've all been warned. Councillor Howe.
Absolutely think it's a brilliant idea to make sure that the people who are helping with this pension actually know what they're talking about, and encouraging them, cajoling them, whichever way works is a good thing. The one thing I would say is, having ploughed through some of the training articles, they are quite long to do. And so it basically is not something you can segment and to do every evening, if you see what I mean. There's a sort of, you either sit down and do it for 2 days, but trying to do it in little bits is not very easy to do. It seems to flow better. So if that could be worked around, and maybe whoever is coming forward with these ideas understands that this is also a voluntary position and that we have other jobs and things to do, then that would be very appreciated. But I think the responsibility of this group is to do the best thing for the pension owners, for lack of a better word.
Very quickly, thank you very much, Councillor Howard. I absolutely agree. The assessment is a very quick assessment, should be quite simple to do. There is no requirement for you to revise for it. It is a simple statement of fact as it is of today. The purpose of the assessment is to identify where the gaps are and then to work collectively for us together to identify what the training plan is, what the best method of that training is, whether it is online learning, whether it's self-learning, whether it is sitting in a room and being spoken at, whether it is attending conferences, etc., etc. We will work the best way for us as a collection, to a collective, to develop that. But it's really to assess where the baseline is, because I could come up with a training plan for the committee and the board, which is what I think you need to know, but actually it's completely not what you need. So to be able to develop an appropriate training strategy, we'll work with colleagues in RBWM's learning and development team. We'll work with our advisors to develop a proper programme, and we'll work out how the best way for it to be delivered to you, to make the best sense for you, is there. So this is a starting point of a learning journey that we will move together. Thank you.
Alan Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Can I congratulate Councillor Howard if he has indeed worked through some of the pensions regulators toolkit, and if he's managed to get himself a certificate out at the end of it, please forward it to Jo and so she can record it in the thing. Can I encourage members of the advisory panel to try and have a look at that material, because certainly the advisory panel is the obvious big gap we have at the moment, where no one appears to have looked at the pensions regulator toolkit, and clearly that's that's something that would always look weak if we were looked at externally. Clearly everyone else has got through, and particularly can we thank Councillor Wilson, who I understand has recently replaced Councillor Da Costa on the committee, for giving that his prompt attention and getting through it. So and certainly the idea of assessing where we are. I think my perspective on this is in the toolkit, effectively we do a test just after we've done some learning to see what we've remembered immediately. I guess this exercise tests whether a few months later we still remember some of it and what we knew in the first place anyway, and I guess that will show some different results, and hopefully inform us how to better improve our collective skill sets to manage the agenda before us.
Thank you. Are the recommendations acceptable? Thank you. So item 7, which is the administration report, which is from Philip Boyton.
Thank you, Chair. So picking up on page 97 of your packs, the standing administration report, this time for Q3 of the scheme year, 1st of October through to the 31st of December 24. If I may take the report as read, I will, however, just highlight parts to you before being happy to take any questions. So turning to page 105.1.4, reporting to you the continuing high volume of data received into the pension team on a monthly basis through the iConnect software system. You will see in the table, unusually, RBWM reported 0% submission. On investigation by the pension team, it appears there was an amount of confusion around the deadline by which submissions should be received. I'm pleased to say that this has been resolved, the evidence being that January and February's submissions have been received on time. The other employer type there, academies and schools, the trend has been a poor performance, I think is fair to say, having reported this to you previously. The reason still remains with one third-party payroll provider, which provides a service to 5 of our scheme employers. However, the pension team have heard that this third-party payroll provider is closing down, meaning the 5 scheme employers are now reaching out to other payroll providers. They have spoken to us about the payroll providers that others use, and we have directed them to a variety, those also having adopted iConnect. So we shouldn't see any scheme employees coming off the use of iConnect on a monthly basis. Moving forward to pages 107 and 108, pleasing to see that across all 4 key performance indicators, the pension team is hitting the target. One particular key performance indicator that we have talked about on previous get-togethers is deceased member processing. I hope you will agree that we are seeing a trend of month-on-month positive improvement. And leading forward into January, February and March, I've been informed that the same trend is occurring. So that will result in 6 consecutive months hitting the target. And finally, through to page 110, special projects. The McLeod remedy. On our past get-together, a paper dedicated to the remedy was presented to you all. I'm pleased to say that the pension team remains on target with that plan, and we will in due course provide another dedicated update to you. The point being here is that the plan that the pension team has put in place with a deadline of 31st of December, having reached out to all scheme employers for their historical scheme member data. We received a positive response from employers, and in the period 1st of January to 31st of March, we are now making sure our scheme member records reflect all our week and break history changes required to be able to calculate whether for those eligible scheme members, the underpin is applicable to them. So rather than the career average pension, they're entitled instead to the better final salary pension benefit. And this all leads into being able to provide an annual benefit statement by the usual statutory deadline of 31st of August 2025, which includes the value of any underpin protection that a scheme member is entitled to receive. There was some doubt around whether our software provider, Hayward Pension Technologies, would be in a position to provide such an annual benefit statement, but we have had reassurance during the past 2 to 3 weeks that that is going to be received by LGPS pension funds, that the functionality to provide those annual benefit statements will be within the system. Over the page, Pensions Dashboards Programme, again, an ongoing project with an ultimate deadline of October 2026, by which time all public sector UK registered pension schemes have to be onboarded and submitting live data to the dashboard. I'm pleased to say we are on track, working hard with our software provider Hayward in ensuring that we meet the deadline and are an early adopter to be able to test the technology and ensure it's available to our scheme members on time. And finally, 2.3, the annual pension increase for 2025 applied from the 7th of April next month has been confirmed at 1.7%. So the pension team are currently undertaking the work to ensure that that pension increase is correctly applied to our in-payment scheme member and deferred scheme member records, with the issue of a pension increase letter going to our in-payment scheme members ahead of them receiving payment to their accounts on the last working day of April. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that report, Philip. That was really good. I'm delighted to see the performance and the KPIs across the board. And also I noticed that from the actual numbers involved, this was a very busy quarter as well. So this wasn't a matter of the quantity of work had eased up and that made it easier. It looks like the quantity of work had actually been about the highest in the year as well. So to achieve such good results is a real testament to the team. So I think there was, as you say, a slight glitch in just 1 month on one KPI, but other than that, you've hit it out the park on every occasion. And I know that that's a testament to the team coming through, because from what's been said previously, you've had issues with trying to have to recruit and bringing people through and train them. And obviously that's now paying dividends, and that the team is really getting up to speed and doing a great job. So thanks and well done to the management team, but also for my part, please pass back my thanks to the team themselves for doing such a good job. And obviously that sets us up going into the new year in a really, really good position for, as you say, for the next quarter, but we'll see next time. But thank you.
If I could say, thank you very much, Councillor Newton, for the feedback. With us is the Pension Administration Manager, Martin Griffiths, who has ensured that a plan has been put in place and constantly in touch with the other senior team members.
Councillor Tizzy.
Just very quickly, yes, I completely echo everything that's just been said. Can I just one small question on the pensions dashboard? Did I hear you say that we're likely to be an early adopter of this, or was it because I heard you saying we're on track? We're on track for this, but obviously this is something we will have to do at some point. But are we on track to meet that the statutory deadline, or are we on track to meet, to get there first, as it were?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Tizzy. Yes, absolutely on point. We set our stall out at the very beginning that we wanted to be an early adopter, predominantly so that we had opportunity to test that the technology was working as is expected by government. There were delays with pension dashboards actually being rolled out because of a revisit needed by government in regards to the technology. However, we kept up with the messaging that was coming out, that we need to make sure that we stay on top and ensure that our data is accurate. So although the delay to October 2026, we continue to work to ensure that we remained an early adopter. So the statutory deadline is October 2026, and we are currently on track to be there ready for when that time comes.
Thank you. If that's everyone, are the recommendations acceptable? Thank you. So that brings us to agenda item 8 on responsible investment. Before we move on to the body of this report, we have some visitors with us, and I believe 3 of them have said in advance they would like to ask a question. So thank you. So I'm led to believe the first question is for Stella Hughes. If you'd like to come up to the table.
Yes, I'm committee member of East Berkshire Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. I should like to raise a question regarding Berkshire Pension Fund's continued investments in companies enabling Israel's violations of international law and Palestinian human rights. This includes companies conducting business activity in or with Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, recognized unequivocally as illegal under international law. Specifically, Article 49.6 of the 4th Geneva Convention explicitly prohibits occupying powers from transferring their civilian population into occupied territories. Last year, the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel's military occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip, is unlawful and must end. In 2016, the UN Human Rights Council adopted Resolution 3136, mandating the UNOHCHR to document companies involved in activities facilitating these illegal settlements. UN reports clearly identify companies whose operations in the occupied West Bank aid Israel to violate international law. In addition, arms companies supplying Israel with weapons and military technology play a key role in enabling Israel's military assaults on Palestinians. Israel's assault on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and caused almost incalculable devastation. The ICJ is rightly investigating Israel for suspected genocide and war crimes in Gaza, and a warrant for the arrest of its leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity has been issued by the International Criminal Court. Despite this, information obtained through recent Freedom of Information requests indicate that our pension fund continues to invest in arms companies supplying Israel. And companies listed by UNOHCHR, the pension fund has an obligation to ensure it is not aiding violations of international law.
1 minute remaining.
In light of the above, we would like to ask why the fund has not yet committed to begin a process of divestment from companies aiding clear violations of international human rights law. We would also like to reissue our call for divestment from arms companies such as GE, Safran and BAE Systems, and any company listed in the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner AHRC 3739 report. Please could the committee update me on actions it is taking to address this? In the light of 9 other local authorities having committed to either divest or look at the possibility of divesting, what, if anything, is preventing you from making the same commitment? Surely it is as simple as instructing LPPI to ensure that the companies you mark as exclusions are not in the portfolio for BPF. You, as the client, having the right to choose, it would seem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just within the 3-minute limit. We're going to take the next question, well, all 3 questions, and then answer them together. Yes, just if you leave the light on. So correct me if my pronunciation is wrong, but the next question is from Sue Sibani King.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Actually, my colleague went on to read my question at the bottom of hers, so I've just got a very short thing that I would like to say, which I was going to ask before I ask my question anyway. And that's that we've got the hard copies of petitions, which I've been in touch with Mikey about, and he's got the soft copy, the online copies as well. So I would like to deliver them to you if you could tell me who to hand them to. We're disappointed, I must say, on the low numbers of signatures, but the reason we suspect that that people are actually afraid to put their name to anything which mentions Palestine, due to them seeing horrendous repression and ostracisation across many of Western societies when they have done so. So the numbers are low. It's a total of 360, 310 online and 310 paper and 50 online. I would like to say just to Councillor Sati that 305 of those are from Slough, and many of them were from council employees. So you may want to have a look at those names on that list. Thank you.
Thank you. And thirdly, Rachel Luxton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Chair of the East Berkshire Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Your latest meeting reports on the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead website emphasises that climate change is a fundamental priority within the fund's responsible investment policy. This underscores the importance of aligning your investment strategies with environmental sustainability. However, there is a fundamental incompatibility between your responsible investment goals and your current investments in companies that supply weapons and military technology to Israel, such as BAE Systems and GE Aerospace, to name just 2. I'll make a few short points from the published research that was emailed to you previously on the environmental impact of Israel's latest assault on Gaza, noting that numbers have, of course, risen since this data was collected, and all figures are underestimations. A study published on the Social Science Research Network estimated that the first 60 days of Israel's war on Gaza generated over 280,000 metric tons of CO2. This figure encompasses emissions from various military activities, including aerial bombardments, ground invasions, and associated logistics. A report in The Guardian from June 2024 details the severe damage to renewable energy assets in Gaza and states that the carbon cost of the first 120 days of Israel's assault on Gaza was equivalent to the combined annual energy use of over 77,000 American households. The conflict has led to the total breakdown of Gaza's sewage, wastewater, and solid waste management systems. The Centre for Strategic and International Studies reported in January 2024 that this collapse has resulted in massive discharges of untreated sewage into the Mediterranean Sea. The United Nations report also from 2024 states that Israel's intensive bombardments have produced an estimated 37 million tonnes of debris laden with hazardous substances such as asbestos and unexploded ordnance. The UN has also reported on the widespread damage to marine and terrestrial environments. We acknowledge that the divestment process may present challenges, particularly within the fund's pooled structure. However, investing in companies that perpetuate conflict and contribute to environmental destruction is antithetical to your stated commitment to environmental sustainability, prioritising climate change, and investing funds responsibly. So my question is, will you commit to divesting from the companies that are supplying the hardware and technology for Israel's war crimes, if not for the sake of the Palestinians, and to comply with international law, then at least to comply with your own policy and stated objectives?
Thank you. Jo, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. And thank you very much for sharing them in advance. It's enabled us to formulate a better response than, sorry, we'll get back to you later. So just bear with, we are working on this. So the fund, I'll answer all three of them collectively, if that's okay. So the fund has already scheduled a review of its responsible investment policy and is in the process of forming a task and finish group to carry out this review, as is on the next item on our agenda. This review will include consideration of a specific statement in respect of conflict-affected areas, which is not currently within our responsible investment policy, and the fund's approach to any new or existing investments in those companies in activities in this area. However, in completing this review, the fund will need to be mindful of advice received from the Scheme Advisory Board issued following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in March 2022, which states, pension fund trustees must always take account of financial factors. They may also take account of non-financial factors if two tests are met. Trustees should have good reason to think that scheme members would share the concern, and the decision should not involve a risk of significant financial detriment to the fund. As part of the review of its responsible investment policy, the fund will consider how it will engage with scheme members and employers or their representatives to obtain views on the updated policy statements in accordance with the requirement under the LGPS investment regulations to consult with such persons as it considers appropriate. Once the fund has agreed its position in respect of all aspects of the responsible investment policy, it will discuss the outcome with LPPI and its partner funds within the pool to determine whether a consistent view is held across all parties. However, in the LPPI model, the fund's role is limited to deciding whether to propose a red line on any type of investment and in defining what that entails. In response, LPPI would need to assess the financial impact of the proposed red line. If there is significant financial detriment, a proposal cannot proceed. If there isn't, the next step is to determine whether the members are supportive. It should be noted that the fund's RI policy will outline preferences that guide LPPI, but do not directly instruct or bind LPPI as they are subordinate to financial considerations. LPPI's existing policies do not include any red lines in relation to specific countries or companies. Their approach is to undertake due diligence on a case-by-case basis, assessing risk and reward in context and on a financial, not moral or ethical basis. Unless clients institute an exclusion that LPPI is required to observe, it having met the two tests that apply to them as LGPS schemes, as noted above. LPPI will not institute hard exclusions other than to implement sanctions put in place by the UK government, such as those in respect of Russia and Belarus. Sorry. Subsequently, there's also been advice from the Local Government Pension Scheme Advisory Board for England and Wales has commissioned Nigel Giffin, King's Counsel, to provide Council's opinion on local government pension schemes, investments and non-financial considerations. The advice from the King's Counsel clarifies that holding stock in any public listed company does not equate to assisting that company in any activities that might be considered human rights violation under international law. The fundamental goal of investment in pension funds is to ensure full funding. Whilst climate change is indeed a priority, the duty of the pension fund is to understand the financial risks posed by climate change over the investment horizon and to invest as sustainably as possible, with financial sustainability being the primary goal, whilst maintaining adequate diversification. Recognising climate change as a systemic risk acknowledges that it cannot be avoided or divested away from, as the entire global economic system is affected. Divesting shares in companies active in Israel would neither stop the conflict nor address its causes. It would not impact emissions already produced or those to be produced in the future, nor would it reduce environmental damage and biodiversity loss. LGPS funds are not intended to make political, moral or ethical decisions. Their purpose is to pay pensions. The flexibility to incorporate non-financial considerations exists, but is limited to those matters that do not conflict with the underlying return objectives. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that very full answer. I would just like to briefly add some expression of my personal views, not speaking as a member of the Pension Committee. Obviously, consideration of this is going to be taken forward through the Task and Finish group. I recognise that our visitors in being here today are drawing attention to the scale of what has happened in Gaza. I would personally acknowledge that there has been suffering and trauma on all sides. I don't personally invest in the companies that are mentioned here. And I realise that that has implications for investment performance of my personal investments, particularly in the short term. But since when I joined this committee in 2019, I recognised that I wasn't here to promote my personal ethical beliefs. I have read the King's Counsel opinion that was referred to, and it does seem to me to be very clear on our responsibilities. There are moves to encourage defence stocks to be viewed in a more positive light, given the UK security concerns at the moment and the very serious international situation. That, as you may appreciate, is a challenge to someone with my personal views to reflect on them and confirm that I still hold them in current circumstances. I also see that as a challenge to defence companies about adhering to expectations if they're going to be viewed in a more positive light in terms of UK security. These are set out in a United Nations Global Compact on businesses, which talks about protecting human rights And this is expanded in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that's the OECD guidelines on responsible business conduct, which talks about human rights, situations of armed conflict, and conducting enhanced due diligence. I have also read a company's human rights and sustainability statement in this sector, and it doesn't refer to conflict-sensitive or heightened human rights due diligence. So in my view, there is a gap between expectations and what is happening. But as I say, this will be taken forward in our task and finish group. I know we want to move on to the responsible investment statement, but does anybody else have anything they wish to say? Councillor Tidd.
Thank you very much, and thank you first of all to the speakers. Thank you to Joe for pulling together a sort of a response in what is a very, very difficult subject. And I must admit, I find this a very difficult situation. Just a couple of weeks ago, I presume we received an email from the LAPFF about how we deal with conflict affected and high risk areas, or CARAs, or I don't know if I've pronounced that right. And it's very difficult. It's hugely complex. And I know that it's not as simple as saying, well, let's divest in defence, for example, because of course a defence stock can be used on the one hand, it can be used in, you can be selling to a bad country or a country that is involved in human rights violations. On the other hand, defence stocks, well, as we know, you can be supplying Ukraine to defend a country against aggression from, in this case, Russia. So it's not as simple as, well, defence bad and therefore divest. I think sometimes there's a good side and there's a bad side. On the other hand, I'm not completely convinced, dare I say it, by the position that Nigel Griffin KC has taken. He gives what is, I think, a legal position that perhaps legally holding shares in a company does not equate to participating in any human rights violations that may exist from the arising from that. That may be a legal position, but he cannot define what a moral position is. As for our responsibility, we are here to stand up for the long-term best interests of our members in order to pay their pensions. And that itself is a complicated thing. It's not simply about short-term, maximising short-term share price gain, because of course shares can go up, they can go down, and there are all sorts of things like governmental intervention that may or may not happen. So there are difficult questions there. For example, I just had a quick look at the 3 companies that were mentioned. Well, given the wars that are happening in the world at the moment, guess what? Those 3 companies that were mentioned, their share prices have gone up considerably. Now, for the short term, that means that to any extent, if we hold these shares or similar shares in defence stocks, that's good from a membership perspective. They've gained from that position. On the other hand, what happens if there are legal cases? We already had, as the speakers have said, the UN has defined the occupation in Israel as illegal, and that further down the line there may be situations where, for example, the UK government might make a determination about that, which might again have an impact on the share price. I'm not going to be able to answer all these very, very difficult questions here. There's no way we can. But I think that perhaps this is something that we should keep a watch on, and potentially we could simply write to certain, if there are key companies, we've had 3 mentioned by the speakers, that we could simply write to them asking, well, why are you, are you supplying, for example, are you supplying Israel here? Are you aware of the fact that this, the UN is calling, has actually sanctioned the government and that potentially human rights violations have taken place, and why are you doing this? What is your position on this? Because I mean, I noticed we are coming on to the other part of responsible investment, but we do this in other areas as well. We do vote against directors as where we see fit, where we see that that is an appropriate thing to do. And I just wonder that that might be a simple way forward, which doesn't commit us either way to somehow resolving these hugely complex questions, but it does, it's more than just dismissing it. And I don't think morally and for the long-term interests of our members that we can just dismiss this.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Howard.
I would just like to add to that is that this is an emotional and political discussion. It also takes into all the complexities of religion and politics and everything. I hear what we've been told. We're here to look after the interests of the members, and should a number of members wish to put forward something, then we can obviously ask the rest of the membership. But I feel that, was it how many, 30,000 members we have? I'm not too sure on the number. And I think is that we should be understanding what those 30,000 people want, rather than make quite a strong decision on their behalf, which may affect their finances as well. So writing to the companies concerned is one thing, but when we do consult on various aspects of our policy of investment, maybe this should be involved in it, just like other aspects of climate, environment. However, the list gets very long because very many people have very strong judgments on everything from pharmaceuticals through to cigarettes, through to war, and it becomes a very complex issue. So I think we can't just look at it very black and white and about one issue.
Thank you. I think this brings us to the end of this. Oh, Councillor Sathi.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I appreciate the speakers who are here today, and they echo the concerns which in my wards and in Slough Borough Council, people do have that. And we do have these questions, ours in our chamber as well, and we are still waiting. And there's it's because of these companies, the funds being invested in those companies. We have to look at the background and the other things which are going on at the moment, and the scenarios in the world. Yeah, what Israel is doing, that one is a clear violation of human rights there. Yeah, and the companies we are investing, the members, about, as it says, about 30,000 members are the members of the Berkshire Pension Fund. Yeah, we can see that there's only 100,000, maybe 50,000 people came out in protest in London, but the concern is for the humanity all over the world. So it doesn't matter that there are members, 30,000 members. They have their interest in there. There's one thing. There's the people who are suffering at the hands of arms. Those companies who are making arms, they are boosting, they are encouraging the human rights violation in that region, and that is causing enormous difficulties and enormous human rights violation in that region. That is the concern in all over the world at the moment. Yeah. The second thing is about what you say about the investment in certain companies by the members. You do go by the interest of the members. That is very good. Yeah, but the concern that is going on, and that the petition that has been brought forward by the speakers, they have, they're not a 313. There's a huge number behind them here. If we write a letter to the members and ask them, or seek their advice, that whether they want the investment in these companies who are violating, who are irresponsible, producing weapons that are used for the violation of human rights. So are they agree to invest these one, or do they want alternative on that one? Yeah, because there are so many other alternative available to invest that funds. If this is going on there, yeah, in this, I don't know, I'm not aware of that, that these companies are making those funds, that they are used in violation of human rights in Palestine. Yeah, so we need to ask. We need to have a consultation on that one, and I will suggest that we should have a separate meeting on that, and we should seek some solution to that one, as because this is a growing concern at the moment in my constituency, where in my ward and in Slough area, and the members, even the employees, they stress us, ask us that why don't you push this petition forward and see questions. And secondly, I ask about the freedom of information. Why don't we give information about these companies and their our view about that investment which is going on there, yeah, and how much we have invested in there, and how they are contributing towards the economy of Israel, and the weapons they are producing and the weapon they are used for the human rights violation. The International Court of Justice also mentioned that one, there is a clear genocide happening in Palestine, and it is really a concern for all of us as the members that we should look into that matter and try to come with some solution. That why not we, if these companies are involved in that one, why not we suggest alternative?
Councillor Sati, could you perhaps draw your remarks to a close? I think you're slightly more onto a political statement, yeah. So if you could just draw.
It's not a political. Sorry, Chair, it's not a political, but it's a concern, and we are here as members representing the political parties and political views as well, yeah, and that is going on there, yeah, and that is linked with the fund as well, yeah. That's what I say. But what I suggest is that we should form a committee to look into that matter and find out some solution for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've now taken the question and considered questions and considered it. So we'll move on to the responsible investment report. To our visitors, thank you for coming. And if you wish, yeah. So if you want to leave the meeting now, that's fine. We'll continue. Oh, yeah.
Councillor Howard, just wait until Councillor Howard's asking if we can have an agenda just for a toilet break.
Oh, just dip out, and I think, yeah, if that's all right.
We'll just wait. We'll just say we're in adjournment. If you just want to say we're in adjournment, Chair, for 2 seconds.
Okay, we're just adjourning for a couple of seconds. Excuse me, everyone. Could I return us to the meeting, please? Bye-bye. So moving on, afraid we are a little later than we'd planned to be at this stage, but thank you for your patience, everyone. And Richard, are you presenting the responsible investment
I
report?
believe so, unless Joe has something to say up front. No, straight to me. So I'll keep this brief. I think the paper is hopefully clear, and as you can probably tell, the majority of what we put in this report is it's a relatively slow-moving beast. So there's there's not a huge amount of changes quarter to quarter. So I'll just highlight a few key things from the front page. So one point that is an ongoing theme that you're familiar with is the net zero evolution, the commitment we've made, the progress we've made, as we've noted here. We formally concluded the tail end of last year of the third phase. As a reminder, we started, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, around 3 years ago. We've stepped through the portfolio building in scope and complexity. If you remember, we did global equities first, which was the easier part to deal with. And as time has gone on, we've moved into the more complicated areas of the portfolio to bring in scope. And by complex, that's more to do with data, transparency, these types of issues. As we've noted here now, we've now got targets covering real estate, infrastructure, and we've been developing what we're doing in corporate bonds. I'm going to quote a number of you, which I don't think is in the report, but just to give you some context, I think it's bringing roughly 85%, 80-something% of our assets within the core portfolio, so the portfolios we run for pension schemes like yourselves, into scope for net zero. So in my mind, that's a very high percentage. Certainly relative to the rest of the LGPS, I believe that's extremely high. And it's partly because we have a whole portfolio to manage, so we've been able to do that for you. Second point, as you know, we use Robeco as an engagement partner. So the team they do an annual, call it a client engagement session, where to refresh the themes they're going to engage in for the forward-looking year. The two themes were highlighted. One was just shareholder rights and the corporate governance piece around that. And the second one, which is a key theme, and actually is very topical in some ways in terms of what's going on geopolitically, transition minerals. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with some of what's taking place geopolitically and how the importance of things like rare earths and other minerals are for very fundamental to the transition, and various other things such as semiconductors and other things. And clearly part of the geopolitical machinations, or whatever word you want to use, that we're seeing, that is part of that is linked to transition minerals or rare earths, whatever you want to call them. So that's the theme now that is elevating within the engagement activity. And the final thing I'll touch upon is the transition pathway initiative. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the TPI. For if you're not familiar, our boss, our CEO, Chris, is a director of TPI, so he's deeply involved in this. The key thing, one of the key elements of it is the management quality, which is a metric that looks at as I say, but fairly the clues in the name, management quality of company management, looking at how they are reacting, dealing with climate change, and there's a quality rate, a rating they put upon that, and we then use that within our management report of the equity portfolio. As is noted in the report, the universe that's being the universe of companies that is being applied to has gone from 1,000 to 2,000 names in the last year, and they're looking to bring that up to 4,000 as such a fundamental part of dealing with climate change as an element, as a key driver of that, how corporates are engaging with the topic and putting a metric on that to help investors such as us and yourselves look at this and understand and engage with it. So I'll pause there. Questions?
Councillor Howard.
With the ESG priorities and how with single equities, when I've tried to look at investigating into their, shall we say, responsible actions, there's an element of greenwashing in certain indexes that companies have put forward themselves into, and to be quite frank, I was quite astonished that some companies had actually passed some of the barriers to get into being green. So that becomes, on a single equity point of view, very difficult to do. On a multiple equity approach, where you're looking at buying into funds which have many stakes in many companies. How are we looking at that? And I mean, don't want to reopen what we've talked about there, but we're talking about sometimes very small parts of business of very large companies who are in turn only a very small part of a fund which has billions and billions under management. I mean, how do we, as us here, manage that and understand the complexity in it and even put any value on it, to be honest?
So it's a great question, and one that I've debated a lot and spoken about publicly as well. I think to take up your first point in terms of indices and ratings, I think there's I'll choose my words carefully. It's quite difficult to create a reductive framework that can categorize some of these multidimensional complex risks and put a score on it, a simple score that says good or bad, which is what has been tried to do. I think it's very difficult to do that. And I think you have to be a bit mindful. So whilst you can create an index doing that, it's very easy, as you say, to look through the index and say, well, that doesn't make sense, that name there. So I think there are challenges around that. However, I do understand why the intent of trying to create a framework to make it manageable. In the context of our portfolios, your portfolio, the way we work is we will have a set of policies that we develop, but we've got a responsible investment policy, we've got a zero approach, etc. So there's a framework of policy, we have a non-conventional weapons policy. When we invest, we make sure that certainly our internal team and the external managers are familiar with all of our policies, and we expect them to invest in line with that. So it's a different way of addressing the same point. So you can try and do things maybe with a screening quantitative approach, which says, let's build some ratings and exclude things we don't like based on scores, or you can come up with a more principles-based approach where we're going with the policy and then look to implement on a more qualitative basis and hold people accountable to that. So that's the route we're in. We have a responsible investment team who they work for me, they report to me, they're part of our investment team. So they will certainly guide on policy. We have a stewardship committee that I chair, which, and it's not just the investment team there to give some comfort. There is our chief risk officer, our chief head of legal and compliance sits on that committee, and it's a formal committee that reviews our policies, will debate emerging themes and risks, and will drive that policy framework, which then the investment team is expected to implement. We also have a separate investment committee actually, which will also challenge some of these issues. So there's a series of governance around it, but it is qualitative rather than quantitative in our framework. And that, as I said, that policy framework is evolving as per any well-governed institution.
So to a certain extent, the organisation that you've put in place is big enough to effectively drive an agenda into the companies and funds that we are investing in to deliver what we want, rather than us having to go out and find them and to shuffle through what they're doing.
Yeah, short answer, yes. Not sure if my it's still on, is it? Yeah, short answer.
I think we win a prize for a short answer and a short question.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Sorry, beg your pardon, Douglas.
Who was first? Apologize. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think it is a good time to be asking this question though, because I'd say a lot of these policies have taken some time to put in place. We have worked very hard on the wordsmithing. We've worked very hard on deciding what we are going to do and what we're going to prefer, engagement versus divestment. I think what is clear though is the backdrop is changing more quickly than we could have anticipated. And the reaction of companies to long-term engagement has turned very rapidly. When we look at some energy transition commitments, for example, spending that would have been committed and is no longer, we've also seen the whole mechanism of engagement lose its teeth in some aspect, because we've seen in, for example, BlackRock and Vanguard in the US pulling back from some of their engagement because it has been deemed to be influencing a company regarding increased disclosure with the SEC. So if some of the lions of engagement are pulling back, where does that place the second attempt, such as a Robeco or Federated Hermes or other kind of engagers? Do we have the teeth we thought we did? Does engagement work? And furthermore, a company's transition plan that was made in good faith a year ago may have been scrapped today. So I just would like to ask LPPI, where do you think this responsible investment policy is fit for purpose or needs to be adapted as quickly as the backdrop is quickly evolving?
pause for 1 second to think about a side answer, an appropriate answer. So I think I firmly agree that the backdrop is changing rapidly and far more rapidly than I'd certainly anticipated. There's clearly very large geopolitical forces at play here that go way beyond a sort of investment capital or what an ESG policy was like. It's much part of a much bigger picture. The ability for investors to engage, I think, as you say, Ethan, has been impaired to some degree, certainly across the Atlantic. I think less so in Europe, but still to a degree. I wouldn't say Europe's unscathed. I think it's an element of it because people have transatlantic businesses, and I think I'll choose my words carefully. I think certainly across the Atlantic, people are very aware of what they're doing, saying for potential legal threat and challenge, and are treading very carefully. I think within our context, are we thinking carefully? We're actively debating, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with the suspension of the IIGCC net zero component. I'm not going to quote an acronym, so I'm going to get it slightly wrong. There's too many acronyms in there. However, we've had to think about that. What are the implications for our net zero commitment? The pause at this point in time as the IIGCC rethinks its net zero approach. We're continuing, as we said we would. We're going to continue in terms of our approach, but it is changing that backdrop somewhat. In terms of, is engagement still effective? I think engagement is effective. I think that you do need, as you say, to tweak how you're thinking about this. Certainly, again, to restate, there's quite a big difference between both sides of the Atlantic. But yeah, at the end of the day, there is, for the very largest investors, let's just say, I think the supply of capital will still continue to be pertinent, and then their voice will be heard. I think it is harder for smaller investment groups because, as you say, there's some of the legal challenge from the US in terms of, I'm trying to get the terms right, sort of maybe call it collusion or antitrust type stuff, I think is concerning, to say the least. So I'll pause there, but I think you're absolutely right to highlight that it is becoming more challenging and needs some thought.
Councillor Howard.
Thank you. Completely agree with what you're saying about everything is changing so quickly. Bearing in mind what we're looking at here, while I was reading this, I was looking at our portfolios and thinking exactly the same question, which is what's going on. The one thing which kept coming back to me, and the only little ray of light I felt that gave me something new that I hadn't thought about, was private equity and looking at I think it was called the 1957 fund. If we can't influence how the world changes around us because we're too small a player, maybe we have to look at the smaller world around us and influence that and try to change our own society for better. And I did find great interest in that fund and wondered whether or not, with the massive, unpredictable ups and downs, which I suspect are going to be coming through the pipeline as tariffs and geopolitical change. And the last time I heard anybody say that there would be a rebalancing of the economy was around about 1982 when Margaret Thatcher did it. And there was a lot of rebalancing of the economy around then. So I think we're in for a time of huge change. And I think the fact is that possibly we should look and concentrate our efforts on things we can change closer to us, rather than some of the laudable efforts we've done to try and encourage sensible payment schemes for directors, green energy with other companies. Maybe we also need to look a bit closer to home. Maybe expanding 1957 would be a way to go forward.
A very brief response on that. So I think what you're highlighting in the language I would use is the ability to drive additionality and change is in my mind, we've talked for a long time about the ability to do things in private markets. So, to your point, if you own a building and you put solar panels on the roof, they would not be there without your additional capital. You can point to it, you can see that you have done that. Whereas engaging with large corporates, some of the team joke that we've had 4 managers turn up and claim the same outcome, that they all did this. So there's an element of that. And so I think focusing on things that are more domestic and where you can have direct line of sight is you can show outcomes more closely linked to your actions. And I think a more domestic agenda, certainly we've been arguing for a while. At least 2 years ago, I stood up a panel at the PLSA and made the same argument about investing more domestically. As I see the global, the geopolitical backdrop is changing, and a more domestic focused agenda feels appropriate, just not least onshoring, some of the geopolitical fragmentation, these types of drivers. And it's certainly something we're very live to, as I'm sure this committee, and I know this committee is very aware of. The government is looking very carefully at this from the Fit for the Future consultation for the LGPS, and local investment is a absolutely fundamental pillar of that.
With the double whammy on that is that our members are generally located locally, and they will get the double benefit of, shall we say, an improvement in the place where they live, as well as a reasonably good investment in their pension fund. So it might be a better win all round.
Thank you. Councillor Tizzy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think Ethan asked the question I was going to ask, but better. So thank you for that. I'd just like to. I mean, this feels so almost like a different world now. We're looking at Q4 2024 and talking about responsible investment. I suspect that next quarter is going to be slightly different and in a different world, and then going forward. I'm wondering if I'm answering my own question here. On page 128 of the main pack, which is on 12 of the supplement, which is about collaborative engagement. It was quite interesting. I found that quite interesting about looking at the various aspects of ESG, etc., and saying, well, what progress have we made with companies? And I think there was one where there was negative progress, some no success. I wasn't quite sure what the difference between flat progress and no success was, but that's quibbling. Yeah, I would be interested to see how this changes in 3 months, 6 months, a year's time. And I just wonder if you have any view on, are there particular areas that you think, oh, don't worry, people are still engaged on that. There are other areas that they're really, really pushing back on at this very early stage, and I appreciate everything's changing.
Well, I think the general level, to Aithan's comment, there is a change in mindset from what you're engaging with and what's being expected of them. And I'm sure Aithan has a more nuanced views. I believe less moved, you're still living stateside, so you're probably much closer to some of the dynamics there, but it's having a significant impact on, I think, mindset and what people are prepared to do and how they're engaging. So I think that is going to lead to more resistance, frankly, to engagement, both either from fear of reprisal, let's say, and also potentially from changing regulatory frameworks, making it more difficult to engage. So I think it's hardly surprising. I wouldn't be surprised to see engagement be more challenging, and that will probably then impact what you can engage on, if that makes sense, because that there will be an impact there. So I don't have a crystal ball, but my suspicion is, things like net zero energy, transition type activity. There's obviously a clear pushback, and so it's more and more jurisdictions on that now. So I think that'll become more challenging to engage in. Some of the other things on this list, without being too precise, you can probably guess there's going to be pushback on some of those as well from the geopolitical movements we're seeing.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question. Looking again at page 128, I see that there's a lot going on. Absolutely. In particular, the CAHRA policy, I believe that Richard and his colleagues are working on. I would say that I think this is a big priority for many councils, many officers dealing with questions on Palestine in particular. And I think it's an opportunity for LPP to show some leadership and to please finish the policy soon. So, sorry, but
after you, yeah. Is that it's been on the priority list, and without being too blunt, we have a I'm chairing a committee meeting tomorrow. No, but I fully agree. It's somewhere to, how do I choose my words carefully? These things are challenging, as just exemplified by the early discussion, but they are critical to be clear. And something I find myself saying quite frequently is, I think it's becoming more and more important to be crystal clear on what you make decisions on and what you don't make decisions on. Because if you're not crystal clear on that, you can either paint yourself into a corner or end up having a huge amount of debate and that's a little tangible outcome. So I think it's becoming more and more important to be crisper on these are things that are, this is the policy, this is what we do make decisions on, this is what we can't make decisions on, and things of this nature are, it's critical. I think it's incredibly important to have appropriate framing, and be clear on where you stand.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. I think this comes down to the age-old dilemma that as an individual investor, you can choose based on various criteria, in that you can go for high risk and high growth, low risk, low growth. You can go very ethically and accept whatever that brings to you in terms of it. As a pension fund, we're aiming for a particular target, and that's set by the liability risks and of the fund. So it's a bit more challenging. So we're getting feedback. Yeah, sorry. It's a bit distracting. But no, as a pension fund, we have to try and invest to get the rate of return for the people. So it's going to be an interesting discussion, I think, in terms of where we go over the next few months and looking at this task and finish group. But coming back to this particular report, I felt that having seen what you were doing and the way the fund was voting, I thought that was very good in terms of the way you were trying to represent the interest of people or the various groups that you were supporting and the challenges where you were presenting. So I'm not expecting an answer to that. It's just a question of, I thought it was well done. And I just wanted to acknowledge that the way you were doing this and how you were managing those investments to try and take an ethical perspective on things, I thought was good. So thank you.
Adrian Devitt.
I'd just like to make another point, just given this task and finish group is on the agenda, I think we are at a unique turning point or fork in the road, say, for this type of thinking. I think we talked about a detox of the economy going on with some of the Trump and Trump economics. But you could say that there has been perhaps some performative engagement that is crept in. There definitely has been greenwashing. There has been a laziness in some of the terminology and some of the linkages that were drawn, say, between diversity and better outcomes. So maybe this is harsh, what's going on currently, but this will be a necessary cleansing, perhaps, of this, so that when we do, we ensure that engagement is nothing if not effective. Instead of just simply saying we engage, we now actually have to prove and link that to action. So I think that, difficult as it is to look at some of the erosion of some of the principles, such as net zero alliances that have taken so long to get in place. We also know that net zero was extremely expensive and uncommercial. So maybe the new solutions will be grounded in commercial reality, which in this economy, we cannot do without. So hopefully there will be some positive development that can come of this.
Thank you. Are we happy to accept the report for publication? Thank you. So we move on to the task and finish group, which is quite a short paper, I think, isn't it? Yes,
very short. Terms of reference proposed as presented in the pack. It's basically the same, very similar terms of reference to that which was used in 2022 when the last group was undertaken. But I also want to amend it, obviously based on some of the discussions that we've already had today about where our beliefs and expectations lie in terms of, and priorities lie in terms of responsible investment, but also want to expand it to look at the 2 climate-related risks that are on our risk register, which are there, but I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to what the risk is that they're trying to show and what the mitigations are, and basically how we're supposed to manage those risks. So
What I want to get really from here is that there's a review, the task and finish group terms of reference are agreed, and that whoever wants to participate in that group puts their hand up either now or in the near future, and that we agree the dates of those workshops to discuss the policies, and the timetable for preparation is as set out in the paper. So agree the process, seek volunteers and agree the dates, not necessarily today, but as soon as practically possible after today. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Tizzy, perhaps at the end of the meeting, if we've got individual interests, we can let Joe know so we can move on. But have you a general point? All right. Okay. So, is that acceptable? Thank you. And then there's the Local Pensions Board work plan.
Yes, the final item on this part is to note the Pension Fund Committee and Local Pension Board work plans. The papers that are presented in your pack, highlights in red show what's changed from the last time you saw this at the end of the last committee meeting to what's planning going forward. They are a moving feast. Things will change quite rapidly depending on what comes out of central government, what comes out of local government, what comes out of investments, etc., etc. But that is the indicative work plan. Today is the last day where the pension board and the pension committee meet on the same day. Going forward, pension fund committee meetings will continue to be in the quarter months as they are at the moment. Pension board will meet 6 to 8 weeks before the committee meetings, so that the board can review policies, etc., and give them greater scrutiny, and for their feedback to be fed into the reports that go to the committee. So there is a flow between the committee and the board and the committee agendas that are shown in those work plans. But as I say, they will be moving feasts, but just for you to note that this is what the plan is going forward.
That's okay. That brings me to the last item, which is Local Government Act 1972, to consider passing the following resolution. Under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 72, the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting whilst discussion takes place on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 to 7 of part 1. If that's acceptable.